If you experience symptoms of autoimmune disease and are desiring to address the underlying roots beneath the symptoms that you experience while feeling supported in this process, this is exactly what we cover in this conversation, where I am joined by the incredible Dr. Kristal Rama. Dr. Rama is a naturopathic doctor whose clinical interests are around women's health, autoimmune disease, digestive concerns, mental health, as well as stress and burnout management. And in this conversation, we get into diet, supplementation, pain management, as well as other important but not as commonly looked at factors when looking at the whole picture of these symptoms, including nervous system state and health, as well as mental and emotional health. I personally receive support from Dr. Rama in optimizing my own health and well-being, and I am so excited to share with you all of the incredible wisdom and compassion that she brings into her practice and into this conversation. So let's get into it. So I would love to hear from you, just as a brief introduction, like what types of conditions, autoimmune conditions specifically, that you support women in within your practice.
Yeah, it's a variety. Everything from irritable bowel disease, which includes Crohn's and colitis, celiac disease, thyroid conditions, so hyperthyroid conditions like Graves' disease and hypothyroidism, like Hashimoto's thyroiditis, MS, type 1 diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, psoriasis. It really is a whole host. And from a naturopathic perspective, there are some pillars that are important that kind of apply to all of those conditions, but then there are some specifics that also apply to some of those conditions, well, to many of those conditions too, that you also want to address. But the two pieces that I would say that I kind of look at first and foremost are the nervous system and the digestive system, whether or not it is a digestive sort of concern. The nervous system sort of has to be there because if somebody is not sleeping, for example, or in pain, their nervous system is heightened, they're in that fight or flight state, it's very difficult to heal in that state. And I would even argue that we can't really heal in that state. We need to get into more of the parasympathetic state, which is I feel heavy, I feel grounded, I feel rested, I feel weighted, I feel safe. I feel relaxed. That is really important because anything we do after that, it's as if we're not touching it then with a 10-foot pole, we're getting into the deep healing. So, particularly stress, sleep, pain, those kind of get managed first. And it also allows people to feel better and stronger to be able to deal with the autoimmune condition. And then, depending on the resource that you look at, 70 to 80% of our immune system lives in our gut. So, digestive health is so important to address to really look at preventing flares. To, I guess, the first goal is sort of management. That's sort of the first way that I look at it is management. And then, how can we prevent flares and get into remission? And then, when we're in remission, how can we prevent relapse? Or if there is relapse, how do we make that really short, really manageable, and then we're on again. We're back sort of in that place of that goodness and that stability again. That's sort of how it kind of progresses and sort of what the goals are, and then kind of what the focus is in autoimmune conditions. And the nervous system and the digestive side really don't get that TLC, I find, conventionally. And that isn't a knock sort of on that system because we need things like prednisone sometimes and immunosuppressants and all of those pieces, but those will help to keep the immune system at bay. But what are the other pieces for quality of life? And what are the other pieces to stay in remission? That's where those pieces, I think, have really deep value.
Yes, I agree. And it's so interesting talking to you from this lens of where I'm at now as someone
Mhm.
who has been through the
Mhm.
system, who has experienced chronic conditions and
Mhm.
now who has been symptom free and able to manage at this baseline state of ease and safety and connection within my body. Because when I look back, I'm
Mhm.
thankful for the times where I was in hospital and I
Yeah.
was having access to prednisone or
Yeah.
different pieces that actually pulled me out of flares in life conditioning situations.
Yeah.
However, the pieces that you're bringing up around nervous system and gut
Mhm.
health, as someone going through the system, unless you have a doctor who is very integrated in looking
Yeah.
at these facets. For me, these facets were never mentioned
Mhm.
to me. And in hindsight, my nervous system state was also connected to my gut health
Yeah. Yeah.
and was such a big driver beneath my symptoms, to the extent that probably wasn't until the last few years that I finally felt safe in my body.
Yeah.
But so often when we are in these states of fight or flight, we
Yeah.
don't, or freeze. We've
Yeah.
partially disconnected in some
Yeah.
ways. We don't even really realize that we aren't feeling safe in general.
No,
And
for
because we
sure.
have no reference point for safety and ease, it's
For
sort of
sure.
how we believe life is and how we need to function.
Mhm.
So I think it's so important that, as someone who's been through this journey, that you look at these factors.
Yeah. And I would the other thing I would add to that is, say your nervous system was really regulated, the day that you get an autoimmune diagnosis, that is a very overwhelming, world turned upside down, heavy, scary, overwhelming day. And that in and of itself can dysregulate the nervous system. And so we should hold that in a different way. We should approach that in a different way. We should have tools for that just as much as we have the prednisone and the immunosuppressants and the other things that help manage the condition. It's really important to recognize that it's a very difficult appointment and day and um, digestion of what's now a new normal for someone, and all of the medical appointments, all the specialist appointments, all the finding parking and the driving and the list of things and contacting the office, all of that is important to recognize. And I think that it unfortunately can get forgotten along the way because when that diagnosis happens, it's another, okay, we're in survival mode now
Yeah,
and doing all the things rather than being and feeling and processing. And that's important as much as all of the doing, I would say.
I 100% am with you on
Mm,
that.
mm,
Now, in terms of ways that women can support their bodies at a foundational
mm,
level when it comes to diet and supplementation, maybe someone who has recently received a diagnosis of an autoimmune condition or has experienced autoimmune symptoms for years, but perhaps hasn't ventured into the territories in how to support their body in a more integrated, holistic way. What
yeah.
are some of the considerations that you typically provide women with
Mhm,
in terms of
mhm.
supporting their bodies?
Yeah, it's very individualized, but with respect to diet, it's looking at, are there any foods that are triggering the immune system, and what are the foods that we might want to include that are supportive of the immune system? So, in terms of those triggers, are there foods that are, high alcohol, high saturated fats, and like deep fried food, high salt, high sugar? Like, are there foods that are a bit of a trigger to the immune system? And then, are there foods that are supportive, which are generally foods that have a lot of color and a lot of variety? So, greens and turmeric and beets and ginger and things that help to provide the body with deep nutrition is more of that sort of happening, that sort of that side of things. And with respect to supplementation, I would say there's sort of two pieces to sort of look at. One, is there anything that we can look for that you may be deficient in that can really help to support you being stronger to help fight this autoimmune condition? And is there anything that we can also support that can help to regulate? So, iron, as an example, is one that women are very often low in just due to regular menstruation. And if you add on celiac disease or Crohn's or colitis or fibroids or other pieces onto that, then we become really deficient in it. So, do we need to support that nutrient that makes us stronger to deal with this? And there's times that are right to do that and times that are not sort of right to do that. Are there things like vitamin D testing that we can do, which we know is an immunomodulator? We know generally higher levels in certain conditions, particularly, for example, in Graves, higher levels are associated with more control of this condition. So that's sort of one aspect. And then are there other things that we can layer in that will support regulating the immune system or bringing down inflammation? So things like fish oil or curcumin or zinc. Are there other pieces that we can sort of add into that? And then alongside that, of course, the nervous system work, because the body has to be in a space to receive all of this and to be in that healing state. And so if we can also do some nervous system support alongside that, we're getting more bang for our buck. We're making sure that what we're doing will land with the body. And with those nervous system pieces, that can be things like acupuncture. It can be things like deep belly breathing. It could be connection with nature. It can be sitting with a tea for 10 minutes a day. It doesn't have to cost a lot. It doesn't have to be a lot, but it's really starting to cultivate slowness, connection to body, and connection to earth. Generally, those are very grounding pieces for people, I would say.
Yeah, I love this. And of course, you need individual history and labs and specific details to provide actual advice to a person. So none of this is actual medical advice. However, from an informational perspective, it can be really powerful to first and foremost understand that there are resources and ways that you can support your body with these pieces, and taking these ideas into your own practitioner can be a great place to start in terms of exploring your own unique body and circumstances
For
further.
sure. Yeah.
One question that I have, because you mentioned pain,
Hmm.
managing pain is a big factor. I'm curious if there are ways, general ways that we can touch on to help support the body in managing that pain level so that people can feel more resource safe, supported, and actually address some of these other layers as well without being completely consumed with the pain that they're experiencing.
Yeah. There's great tools medication wise, supplement wise, and also I would say the mental emotional health side of things too. So for medication, we may need to use something like prednisone to put a big damper on joint pain and inflammation and just allow that to not be running the show. Allow that to not be in control. The day to day is easier. And so the other pieces that maybe we want to incorporate also become easier. With respect to supplementation, maybe it's inflammation. Maybe there's a really elevated CRP, which is a marker of inflammation in the body. It doesn't tell us where the inflammation is coming from, just if it's present. Maybe we need to add in curcumin or fish oil and help put a damper sort of on that inflammation. Maybe we also need to look at other tools like retraining how the body is processing pain and trying to cut that loop that can start to happen with chronic pain where when there's pain, whether it's high or not, it's received by the body in a heightened way. Maybe there are tools in working with a counselor or myself or through acupuncture that we can actually change the relationship to the pain. And that's not discrediting the pain in any way. That's just starting to see how the body is interpreting it and making sure that it's interpreting it in the right way and not this heightened way, which can happen in chronic pain and lots of inflammation and even just in a mental health state, right? Where we observe things differently in the body, different levels of hunger, different levels of motivation, different levels of sleep quality. That all matters to look at when it comes to pain.
I love that you've mentioned that there because it's interesting that the brain actually processes physical pain and emotional pain in a very similar pathway.
For sure.
And
Yeah.
I have found through my own personal experience and then also through supporting women
Mhm.
that emotional pain tends to magnify physical pain. And
Yeah.
so, what you've mentioned here around receiving support from some sort of practitioner to actually process through that
Yeah.
emotional pain, because a lot of the time we can be so stuck in survival that we don't actually have the space or attunement or connection to it.
Yeah.
But also, as you mentioned, reframe the relationship that we do have with
Hmm.
pain.
Hmm.
That's one of the biggest things that I do within my work specifically.
Hmm.
is to actually support women in rewiring, reframing, and recalibrating the relationship that they have primarily with emotional pain and how that intersects with physical pain.
Yeah. And it's so important because generally what we say for autoimmune conditions is that genetics may set the stage, but there is something environmentally, whether it was medication, whether it was a time of high stress, something that then pulls the trigger and sort of says, now this autoimmune disease is coming to light. And I would say that it's very, very few times where it isn't preceded by a time of a woman feeling very stretched, or a time of high stress, end of a relationship or end of a job, a trauma of some kind. Like it generally is, they're generally in history, when speaking with patients, there's something that really shifted at a particular time, and then the nervous system and the immune system started going in a different direction. And a big thing that I want to highlight, because I find this happens a lot with autoimmune conditions, is that there's no guilt and there's no shame in that. Every single cell in your body is working for you. It's only doing this to try to protect you. We just want to send it some signals to help it go in a different direction and say, thank you for protecting me. I want to go this way. So a lot of women, I think, feel this weight, like I did this to myself, or it's so unnatural for the body to be attacking itself, and I'm at fault for this. And I want to say that you're not. Your body is still working for you. We just want to redirect it. And there are people like yourself and myself that can help resource you with more tools if you're finding that you're struggling and you need more support, or your quality of life needs to be better, or your pain isn't managed. Those people exist. It's a really, really, really important theme that I noticed that I just wanted to touch on and mention.
Yeah, I've noticed the same, and I can
Mm,
speak firsthand
mm,
as someone who felt for years that my body was faulty
mm,
and there was something wrong with me.
mm.
And oftentimes what I find is, of course, we can speak to that in terms of what's actually presenting within our bodies
Yeah,
when we have chronic symptoms.
yeah,
But when I zoom out after years of processing and dissecting all of the patterns beneath those symptoms that
yeah,
I experienced on an emotional level, mental level, nervous system level with a fine scalpel, what I
yeah,
found is that feeling of there's something wrong with me, I'm faulty,
yeah.
actually was a feeling that I felt throughout my life,
Mm,
way before I experienced symptoms. And I find that because of that underlying feeling, it can almost become this identity that makes it really, really difficult for women to feel that there is something that they can do,
mm,
or even that they're worthy of support. I
yeah,
find that women often feel guilty
yeah,
even for booking the appointment to seek support, whether that is for what you
yeah,
support women with or counseling or
yeah,
support in general. It can take a lot to actually, in terms of friction, in terms
yeah,
of pain, to
yeah,
actually catalyze a woman
yeah.
to reach out for support.
100%. Yeah, I agree with that. And I would say that autoimmune disease is an invitation to return to self. And that's not something that I'll necessarily discuss with patients in the first or second visit, because there has to be some time for sort of the dust to settle, for us to have a plan, for people to be feeling better. But then the discussion often will shift to, okay, how do we want to prioritize self? And how do we want to set some boundaries? And where are we feeling overstretched? What is energy draining? What is energy providing? Where are we on the hierarchy of sort of the day to day? Those are all important things to look at to manage flares in particular. Because when we start to push the body and the immune system starts to feel stressed, it will start to become erratic again. And so when that discussion, I feel, can sort of happen, I will often have it and say, this is bringing you back to you. and not necessarily looking at all the other pieces and prioritizing everybody else and serving everybody else and forgetting yourself at the bottom of that. It's inviting you back in. And we want to always ask the body, particularly in autoimmune conditions, what do I need right now? And then a lot of decisions start to become more clear, not necessarily easy, but more clear from there.
Dr. Rama, the level of reassurance that I feel as you're speaking this is big, because it was only recently that I actually discovered the word autos
Mm.
is the Latin root of autoimmune,
Mhm.
and it actually means self.
Mm.
And so when you look at autoimmune, of course, you can think about it in terms of the body attacking the self. And
Mhm.
that's why we utilize that word in
Mhm.
autoimmunity. But
Mhm.
for me, the journey has really been coming back to myself.
Mhm.
And I find that is often the case with a lot of the women that I support too. And so there seems to be this pattern across the board of disconnection from self and of this conditioning that operates oftentimes below conscious level of awareness, where I think specifically as women, we are so conditioned to consider other. We're so
Yeah.
conditioned to consider, what does everybody else need?
Yeah.
And what is expected of me? And what do I need to do to provide
Yeah.
relational value and to be good enough and to
Yeah.
belong and to be worthy, which
Yeah.
ultimately boil down to safety. And
Yeah.
so that brings a lot of attention and focus out there,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it's not really here. And
Yeah.
so that reconnection to the body,
Yeah.
what do I actually need, has
Yeah.
been massive for me within my journey. It's massive for the women that I support.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, in order to take that journey from out there to in here, we have to face and meet all of those underlying emotions and
Yeah.
imprints that actually caused us to place our energy out
Yeah.
there, which is perhaps the inherent worth piece,
Yeah.
the receiving, the attunement to our own emotions, rather
Yeah.
than my emotions, my needs cause disapproval. They're
Yeah.
too much. They're a burden to others.
Yeah.
Oftentimes there's this disconnection from emotion, from need of self,
Mhm.
and this prioritization of focus on other
Mm.
that seems to be a collective wound for women in general in terms of how we are conditioned.
Yeah.
And then specifically, I've noticed this pattern in women who experience autoimmune conditions.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, moving into kind of the more emotional, mental considerations, because our nervous systems actually become wired
Yeah.
in this way in terms of threat perception. And I'm curious the types of patterns that you have noticed in women who experience autoimmune conditions in relation
Yeah.
to this.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of personality traits, I would say that there is a trend. And again, there's no shame, there's no judgment, there's no guilt in this, but it does tend to be the woman who is a high achiever, who is highly ambitious, who is really in her community and serving. And that's with her family, that's maybe with her church, that's maybe with a volunteer organization, and struggles from what they have told me about saying no and setting boundaries and prioritizing themselves as much as the other priorities that they have on their plate. And there's a saying that's often a counseling saying that's equal consideration of self and others, equal. And often when I speak to women about this, they sort of take a moment and it just like lands because everything else is above themselves. And when we start to say, okay, this friend needs help with something, and I am here, am I equally considering myself and this friend? Do I need to say, hey, you know what? I don't unfortunately have the capacity right now. Can I give you a call in 2 days when I've had a chance to rest and take care of some other things that are on my to-do list and get a couple nights of good sleep? And that in and of itself, that what I just set was a boundary.
Yeah.
That's not taught or practiced. So of course it would be difficult. And that's even more why I say there's no guilt, there's no shame, there's no blame, because it's actually the actual saying of it that has to be, it's a skill and it has to be practiced. And that's not what women are taught. Like, we are here culturally, society, to serve everybody else
Yeah.
before ourselves. And that's not doing us justice. That's not doing us service. And it's not, I think a lot of times women will maybe reframe it and sort of look at, oh, I'm being selfish, or oh, I'm being, I guess selfish is the word really that comes up. And it isn't selfish to equally consider yourself and somebody else. It's actually a self honoring and a self respect piece. That's the way that we want to be looking at it, not in the way of, I'm doing this and everything else gets left behind, because I know women won't do that. It's, I'm
Hmm.
doing this, I'm assessing capacity, I'm checking in, I'm saying, what does my body need right now? And then with that answer, I'm honoring that, I'm practicing the skill of boundary. And as you practice it, it gets easier. And I'm honoring this commitment and I'm honoring myself at the same time. That's what I think is important. And though this may be the pattern, and in my work, that's really what I do, is I recognize pattern. I have to be a person that recognizes pattern. That is the pattern that I typically see. That, and I would say that there can often be a history of trauma,
Yeah.
various different types,
Yeah.
that needs to be processed. And the way that I sort of explain that, to patients is, it's sort of like a balloon, a full balloon that you try to push underwater. And you can push it underwater, but it's going to pop up again. And you can push
Yeah.
it underwater again, but it's going to pop up again. And you can keep pushing it down, but it will continually pop up. And it may pop up in ways that we don't want it to pop up, or in areas that we don't want it to pop up. And so that's why it's important, as difficult as it can be, to take that box, of trauma, to open it up with somebody that's experienced, that's skilled, that's trauma informed, to start to process that in a way that feels doable and reasonable and safe, of course, for that person, so that it's not popping up in other areas of the body, and particularly in a dysfunctional immune system.
Yeah. I wonder where you were 10 years ago when I would have needed to hear all of this. And
Oh.
I fit that exact pattern
Mm,
of somebody who was
mm,
ambitious, driven. I had this internal drive, and I still do. However, I've balanced that with
yes.
the connection to my body, my needs, my capacity,
Yeah.
and this sense of worthiness and ability to actually
Mm,
prioritize those aspects of myself.
mm,
But I had fit those patterns very specifically, and I thought that's just who I was. And what was within my awareness was, without me knowing it, was
mhm,
this overemphasis of value in terms of what I did and what I
mm,
accomplished, and even
yes.
what I did for others. So often showing up for others, being the one who was there for others, achieving within my career, keeping like
Yeah.
my house spotless, even like I was this little bundle of attempted perfection.
That's a big one. Yeah.
Holding so much together, but I didn't realize that I was doing it. I
Mhm.
just thought that's what I needed to be doing in order to be successful and
Yeah.
happy and loved.
Yeah.
And tying this back into the trauma piece, what I didn't realize is that there were all of these subconscious beliefs, these
Mm,
imprints that were wired into my nervous system, where I had learned not only within my life, but also generationally,
yeah.
that that's what I needed to do in order to be loved and safe.
Yeah.
So a lot of the time we think about trauma as abuse,
Mhm,
that what we
mhm.
call big T trauma.
Yes.
I never felt like I had any trauma within
Yeah.
my life. And I think for a lot of these women, they don't either.
Yeah.
And there's two pieces that I want to mention there with that. The first is that we often disconnect from or repress painful
Mm-hmm.
events and
Yep.
emotions when we don't
Sure.
have that support and a
Yes.
supportive, empathetic human to actually be present with us, to hold us as we move through those painful feelings.
Yeah.
So a lot of that trauma that we speak to is what we would call, I guess, little t trauma, where perhaps it was needing support or having big emotions and not being attuned to, or very human happenings, which I can speak to as a mother now. It's very
Mm-hmm.
humbling as a mother
Mm-hmm.
doing this work because I'm hyper aware and attuned of how the very human things within
Mm-hmm.
my life were perhaps my expression of emotions overwhelmed my mom.
Yeah.
Overwhelmed my mom,
Yeah.
caused a form of disconnection
Yeah.
in a way. Through that, I learned that my expression of emotion or my expression of my needs was too much
Yeah.
and it was burdening and it
Yeah.
actually caused disconnection from
Yeah.
others. And so, in order to maintain connection with others, I actually learned to disconnect from myself, from
Yeah.
my emotions, from my needs. So,
Yeah.
I think going full circle to what you spoke about there in terms of actually what do I need? That
Yeah.
is often a conditioned disconnection in the form of trauma,
Yeah.
which is really just how we processed what was
Mhm.
happening given the developmental stage that we were at these
Yeah.
early ages, right? And we know, like,
Sure.
the ACEs studies
Yeah.
how childhood trauma impacts women who experience these chronic conditions and diseases.
Yeah.
And there is a clear link between
Yeah.
earlier childhood trauma and these types of health conditions. And
Yeah.
so, actually bringing that awareness piece in, even if you don't connect to any sort of trauma or understand what that trauma
Yeah.
might be from earlier in your life.
Yeah.
And it's not about blame, it's not about blaming parents
No.
because these patterns tend to run generationally. We
Yes.
cannot give our kids what
Yes.
we never received.
Yes.
But it is about understanding that when there is disease and chronic conditions, oftentimes it's not just occurring on a physiological, biological level. As you
Hmm.
said, there are these emotional,
Yeah.
mental, nervous system factors that
Yeah.
do play a role
For
as
sure.
well. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you layer in, other pieces like culture, birth order, different personalities and like there's so many pieces that start to get layered in. And so that's why there's no blame with that, right? It's again an invitation to return to self. And if we choose to look at that, and the other thing that I want to say sort of in relation to that is that it's hard work, but on the other side of that, I promise there is such alignment. There is such alignment. There is such balance. There is such health on the other side of that.
Yeah.
And so when it is possible and doable in ways, again, that feel safe and supported and realistic for a person, it's really, really important to look at. And I want to ask you too about how you kind of navigate those belief systems with women and how you help to regulate the nervous system in relation to that. Like, I want to know, and I want people to know kind of what tools are out there to help to calibrate
Yeah, that's
and
a great
process.
question. One of my biggest philosophies in what I teach is that the symptoms of life often mirror or connect to the symptoms that we experience within our bodies. So, because a lot of these subconscious beliefs and areas of conditioning can be repressed
Mm-hmm.
and live within our blind spots, it's not about all of a sudden searching for what they are per se, but rather when we look to what actually takes us out of ease within our lives. So the areas where we might feel emotional pain, where we might be triggered, where we might be overwhelmed, we are so used to pushing that down just to carry on and get all of the things done. But when we actually pause long enough to actually acknowledge how we feel
Mm-hmm.
around something, that often takes us directly into the underlying feeling state, emotional energy, and starts to actually disassemble those beliefs. So I want to give you an example of what I mean here. So one of the areas where I often had a lot of friction within my life that took me out of ease, that I also notice amongst the women that I support, is this feeling of I'm not supported. I'm holding it all. I'm not supported. The people within my life aren't showing up for me. They don't see me. They don't acknowledge me. Right? So that is a relational symptom that seems to occur across the board.
Yeah.
And when we actually go into that feeling and allow ourselves to be present with the sensations that emerge within our body through that process, with the emotion that might come up within that process, oftentimes the underlying feeling is a sense of sadness, a sense of pain, a sense of I don't feel like I'm being met. I don't feel like I matter.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's this awareness that comes up from earlier memories or experiences, very human happenings, such as, oh, I'm 2 years old and I just had a baby sibling born and I'm feeling insecure, like, do I even matter anymore? And I'm trying to get my mom's attention, but they're so occupied. And this is why it's not about blame, because as a mother, who's primarily who I work with, you very much understand the other side of the equation, that it actually didn't mean anything about you not mattering. It was actually your mom only has 2 hands and so much space in a baby. However, it's not about explaining it away. It's actually being with the very real feelings that likely were imprinted.
Yeah.
And crystallized within our system at that time, because when we are in that overwhelmed state and something is taking us out of feeling safe, and we didn't have a parent in this specific example to come and comfort us, they were probably like, shh, stop here. Like, you know what I mean? Mom can't come right now. That lack of emotional attunement and of having our needs met is often what creates that imprint or belief that my needs are too much, I don't matter, which is now being triggered through that relational symptom of not feeling like you matter within your relationship, not feeling supported. And so from that perspective, and because these wounds happen relationally, this is why it's so important to receive support in terms of finding a practitioner who can actually be present within that experience with you, because that actually creates safety within our system, and it repatterns that belief that I do matter and my needs and emotions are important. And when we filter through that emotional energy, and not only the emotional energy, but that survival stress from those earlier imprints that didn't just disappear. When we don't have present compassionate attunement, that energy doesn't go anywhere. Typically, it remains within our system, impacting the functioning of our nervous system, from my perspective anyways, until we actually create the capacity. Nervous system capacity is a big part of my work, because capacity is built. And so when we actually allow ourselves to be supported in processing through that emotional energy, the charged survival energy, oftentimes what we're doing is we're returning to a state of ground and safety within our system, bit by bit, piece by piece, through looking at these relational symptoms or the triggers that come up within our work. There's an often direct pathway. And for those women who have children, oftentimes our children will mirror the underlying feelings and beliefs that were imprinted within us much earlier in life. So my daughter and her big needs and her big expression of emotion used to make my skin crawl. Like I would have a visceral reaction within my body as a result of that. And so without actually going into those triggering feelings and receiving support, I would have never understood that the reason I was so triggered by her big emotions or her big expression of her needs is because I had learned to repress mine.
Yeah.
And through doing this work, we are able to process through those underlying emotions, get our needs for support met, and also reconcile the relationship, the resentment that we might have beneath the surface when it comes to these earlier experiences. So it's really a process of kind of peeling back the layers of the onion with support, with a roadmap, like you said, with someone who is trauma informed, where it's not going to flood
Yeah.
the system.
Yeah.
I think earlier in my journey, I would go to these breathwork sessions and I would have these emotional releases, but I didn't actually have the nervous system capacity to support that magnitude of emotion running through me. And so it would reflood my system and I would feel like I was having these breakthroughs or these emotional releases, but actually it was setting me back into this state of overwhelm or freeze, and I would have to recover from it. So I think all of these are important facets to be aware of and to consider, and really just to find a practitioner that you feel safe with, that you feel understood and seen with, because that's often the core imprint that was made beneath all of this.
Yeah. Belief systems are really important. And yes, in autoimmune conditions, but just in health in general, because if we have a belief system that I am not worthy, what does it matter if we nourish our bodies? What does it matter if we move our bodies? What does it matter if we sleep or don't sleep or choose, um, certain choices, certain substances? It doesn't.
Yeah.
So that is ultimately the belief system that needs to be rewritten and actively sort of worked on so that we can achieve health.
Yeah.
And it, what I think what's really important to say and what I really want women to know is that that is very overwhelming to do on your own. Find your team, your medical doctor, perhaps your naturopathic doctor, a wonderful therapist like you that work through all the different facets so that you feel held and supported and you're not navigating all of those pieces on your own,
Yeah.
because it's sort of like if there's something, if there's an issue with your car, you would take it to a mechanic, right? You wouldn't try to fix all these nervous system, belief system issues on your own. You would take it to the appropriate professional that's trained, that has experience, that's educated about this. So know, again, those people exist and that you can build a team for the pieces that you feel like you need support with. And those
Yeah.
people exist.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think part of the challenge there is that oftentimes women don't understand that there are all of these
Hmm.
facets beneath
Yes.
their health experience and their wellness and the conditions they've been diagnosed with, because that isn't necessarily common knowledge or mainstream knowledge. And so that's why I'm so grateful for these types of conversations that can hopefully provide that information and awareness that, hey, these might be factors beneath the symptoms you experience, and there are resources that you can actually lean on and utilize and implement to support your body and your overall self.
Yeah.
And regarding the worthiness piece, I mean, that's huge, because so much of the time we can go about life shifting our diet and working out or moving our body or really any sort of action from a place of I'm unworthy and I need to do this so that I can
Yes.
then be worthy.
Oh my goodness, yes.
So
Yes.
that so I could be working out and feeding my body in a certain way because I don't feel worthy and I want to change myself so that I can then feel like I'm enough and so that I can be desirable and so that I can be loved.
Yeah.
Or and that's the energetic state and
Yeah.
vibration, which really is a state of threat.
Mhm. Oh, for sure, yeah.
It's externally source safety. So I'm
Yes.
okay only if I do these things so that then I can be loved and in connection, and then I'm safe. Or I can be feeding my body in a certain way and moving my body in a certain way because I love my body and I love myself and I want to take good care of myself so I can be strong. And that's a very different energetic state of being and state of connection within. So you can have the same action or similar actions coming from a very different belief system, from a very different feeling and energetic state. And I think the piece that I kind of want to bring in here and where I want to go with this quickly is Dr. Joe Dispenza does a lot of work, him and his team, around the field and study of epigenetics and how our environment, as you said, signals the gene. Not only that, but how our environment actually dictates whether pathology can bind within our cells, certain pathology. And our environment doesn't just include our external environment, it also includes our internal environment. So that state of being, as I mentioned, the energy and feeling state from which we are going about making choices and decisions within our life. And so I'm curious, when it comes to underlying pathogens, viruses, bacteria, parasites, and even environmental toxins, what your perspective is on that when it comes to autoimmune conditions, and if there are any considerations specifically around, environmental toxins, personal care products, pesticides, this sort of thing that can also come into the mix and conversation.
It's really important because, again, we want to know what is triggering this immune system. And if it is mold, and we suspect, if we suspect mold, and if it is mold, then we want to be doing something about that, as an example. So there are cases where I will test for mold if I suspect that it's there. And if it's positive, we have a doctor at our office that I will refer, because he does a lot more of the complex chronic diseases when it comes to environment, and is very helpful at helping people detoxify sort of mold from their body. And that's one of those underlying pieces that can be this trigger to this immune system just constantly being activated, and that low grade inflammation that we want to essentially put the fire out on. And then there's other pieces to look at. So, for example, in Graves' disease, very commonly associated with Graves' disease is H. pylori, which is a parasite that lives in the stomach, which is very difficult to do because it has a pH of about 1 to 2. But it has all these survival mechanisms to be able to do that. And if we suspect that, this person has Graves' disease, there's digestive concerns, or maybe even outside of that, do we want to test that because of the association that we know? We want to know if this is a trigger for their immune system. We want to know if there's any extra burdens on the system with respect to the makeup they're using, the topicals, the foods that they're having and sprayed with pesticides. But it can be overwhelming to look at all of these pieces all at once, which is why it's important to go to someone that can help guide you and say, okay, we're focusing on managing inflammation, bringing your pain down, and getting you sleeping. Okay, we've got that. We're focusing on making you stronger and starting to regulate the immune system in other ways, and maybe optimizing your vitamin D, looking at your nervous system. Okay, we've got that covered. Okay, we want to look at making sure that all the systems are firing. How is your mental health? How is your digestive system? Like, is there any work that we need to be doing there? Okay, what are the other pieces that could be triggers? Okay, let's look at maybe giving you a resource called the Environmental Working Group, and you're having a look at your cleaning products and just your makeup products to start, and seeing if these are rated a 1 to 2 on the Environmental Working Group scale, which indicates that they're low, sort of parabens that are being added into the body when you're using these products on a daily basis. That may be the trajectory of sort of how we go about doing these things. Or if there's really imminent sort of, yes, you've lived in a home, there has been a flood, there is this musty smell, you've noticed mold growing that you've had to say spray, then maybe we move that up to the forefront. But it does have to be looked at, because again, it's not just about the prednisone or the emotion or the diet or the nutrient. It is looking at everything sort of holistically. And It's important to manage overwhelm, which is why I say that it's really important to do with a practitioner that can kind of help guide you. And
Yeah.
the right practitioner will know what will land, what will be supportive, and when. That burden can be passed on to somebody else. So it's
Yeah.
not something that you need to be carrying, and you know that somebody has your back. The support is so needed to
Yeah.
prevent overwhelm. So find who that person is that can, and that team that I mentioned sort of earlier, that can help walk alongside you in this, because you certainly don't have to do it alone, and it's too overwhelming to do all alone. But there may be other pieces that I've mentioned that are actually contributing, that are important
Yeah.
to look at, that somebody could guide you in.
Yeah.
um, and generally I would say with autoimmune conditions, for a lot of people it is often one of those diagnoses where you're starting to look at health in a different way, right? You're really starting to look at, am I eating the dirty dozen and sort of the clean 15 in ways that maybe I should be looking at those, those things that are heavily sprayed? Maybe we are buying berries and greens and peppers organic, but we're not so much worried about a banana because we're peeling the peel. Like maybe there are pieces like that that we're starting to navigate bit by bit in a different way with somebody that can walk alongside us in this, but in chunks,
Yeah.
because you're wanting to take care of your health, but it's possible to do in time, not always possible sort of at the time. And so the stepwise approach, I guess, is what I'm really getting at, is
Yeah.
really important to look at. And again, it is bringing you back to self. Like, how can we just simplify things? How can we use
Yeah.
vinegar and water and a little bit of essential oils to clean? Does it have to be
Yeah.
all of these chemicals? Like, how can we just simplify? It sometimes gets overwhelming when we look at the full picture when it comes to
Yeah.
toxins and even just plastics. I mean, it's absolutely everywhere. It's like absolutely everywhere. And so
Yeah.
it's maybe looking at things like, what are your storage containers, and are you using a plastic cover in the microwave, and what's your water bottle? That may be where your practitioner supports you in changing first. And then we move on to the next thing where we look at, where else are there plastics sort of in your life? But with the right sequence, with the right support, with not too much overwhelm, I guess.
Yeah,
Super
I
important.
agree. And as someone who's walked through this journey, I know firsthand it can be very overwhelming, especially when you do start to become aware of all of these pieces. And oftentimes with symptoms, it can already feel like you're alone
Yeah.
and overwhelmed, and there's so much to carry.
Yeah.
And that overwhelm and the stress associated with all that, we know is more prone to amplifying
Yeah.
flares and pain. And so,
Yeah.
as you mentioned, receiving support,
Yeah.
allowing yourself to receive support to be guided through this process. And what I'm hearing from you, it's really a matter of an assessment of, okay, what are the most
Mm.
significant factors here? What are the low hanging fruits, the most important
Yeah.
pieces in terms of the underlying root,
Yeah.
which may be a physical consideration, such as mold or different facets that we can work on to lower inflammation and to lower pain? Or maybe it's this experience of stress and overwhelm that's
Yeah.
completely taking you out and affecting your
Yes.
system, which is driving that pain. And so receiving support from somebody who can actually understand all of these facets
Yeah.
is really, really important. And there was a time within my journey where the fear around my symptoms and the
Mm.
overwhelm around my symptoms shifted over to the fear and overwhelm of, oh my gosh, what do I eat to
Yeah.
manage inflammation? And oh, what do I even use in my house and on my body
Yeah.
to? And so that right there in and of itself can be an orientation
Yeah.
and a
Exactly.
relationship within us
Yeah.
from fear, from
Yeah.
overwhelm. And really the journey is, like you said, coming back to self and finding this sense of internal safety and support through
Yeah.
that process
Yeah.
so that you can move through the journey and take the step bit
Yeah.
by bit, depending on what is most important.
Yeah. And you may be the only one in your family that's had to look at this and do this. So of course it would feel isolating, right? Like that's important to look at too. Like no, there may be nobody in your friend circle in your family that has to look at products or assess. So that's why it's important to also have companionship and support in it because it's new territory, right? And in any new territory, it's okay to have support and it's important, in fact, to have support
Very,
in it. So
very
if you're the first one that's walking this, yeah, definitely don't walk it alone.
beautiful. I have one last question for you.
Okay.
In
Okay.
closing, I could pick your
Mhm.
brain for another hour, but in closing, what I
Mhm.
would love to ask you is what is something that you wish every woman experiencing autoimmune conditions or symptoms
Hmm.
would know and understand?
I have a couple. First, I would say it's not your fault. The second I would say is it's going to be okay. I promise you it's going to be okay. And the third that I would say is start to look at your nervous system and see how you can cultivate some slowness, whether it's sitting mindfully with a cup of tea, whether it's going for a walk without your phone for 5 or 10 minutes on a lunch break, whether it's putting on some calming music with maybe some lavender essential oil before bed, see where you can start to cultivate some slowness. And from there, your nervous system and your immune system will start to respond. You just have to start sending it some signals.
Yeah.
And there are people that can help support better quality of life
Yeah.
for you. If you feel like you're not having your needs fully met, there are people that can help support you in your highest power, your greatest good.
Yeah, and not no one person can really meet all of your needs.
Mm-hmm.
I think for
Yes.
so long
Yeah.
I put so much on my partner.
Mm,
And really we all have gifts and strengths that we bring to the table, but no one person can meet all of those needs, and it's okay to seek support from knowledgeable, compassionate
yeah.
practitioners. The
Yeah.
piece that you mentioned about the slowness and the stillness, I really want to end on that note and
Mm,
emphasize as someone who was diagnosed with a condition called Still's disease,
mhm,
how symbolic it is to
mm,
understand that that stillness,
mhm.
that slowness is often the polar opposite of the personality traits and patterns in these women. As you mentioned, it's not your fault. It's not that you are
No.
inherently wrong or faulty. It's often these deeper patterns and conditioning that run through our generational lines, that run through culture,
Yeah.
that run through our wiring as women. And so cultivating the capacity to slow down. You
Yeah.
wouldn't think that's a capacity or
Yeah.
skill that
Yeah.
needs to be learned, but the
And a
capacity to slow down.
privilege, right? I would
Yes.
say a privilege too. I recognize that that's a privilege
Yeah.
for a lot of women. And so I think the way that you approach your work and I approach my work is sort of, what's realistic, right?
Yeah.
Like what is going to get us to that end goal, but what's realistic and
Yeah.
sustainable for us to do. Um,
Yeah.
I think both you and I were never going to ask you to do things that feel unattainable. And if they are, then we say okay, and we readjust and
Yeah.
then move forward in a different way.
Yeah. You can meet yourself where you're at, essentially,
Hmm.
because
Yeah,
it can take as little as 5 minutes
yeah,
to take that moment to connect inwards, to put your
yeah,
feet on the grass, or even just take a few breaths in the shower or in the bathroom when you have kids and everything else going on in your household. And it makes the world of a difference in the state and connection that you have within yourself and how you go about going through the rest of your day, because presence and connection actually expand time in my experience. So
we do.
they really can. I love that. Thank you so much, Dr. Rama, for all of your wisdom and your energy and just for who you are and all of the compassion that you bring into the space. I'm so grateful to be able to connect with you as a human, as someone who receives support from you within your practice, and to be able to share this wisdom with others.
Oh, that's so kind. I want to thank you for holding this space and for giving me the opportunity to sort of share ways that I can support women in feeling better. Women are superheroes, and my goal is just to help them do what they're already doing in a way that feels like there's more ease.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for watching. I have included all of Dr. Rama's clinic and contact information below. And I have to say, as someone who has navigated many years of autoimmune symptoms and flares, this conversation feels like it includes such powerful information, perspective, and insight around the deeper considerations and roots beneath these conditions. So it's a real honor to be able to share this with you. And I would love to hear in the comments what pieces specifically spoke to you, what were your key takeaways, and what further questions might you have on these topics. I invite you to subscribe to continue receiving these videos, and I will see you in the next one.